some correlations that may seem surprising. Key findings from studies: 1. Higher IQ and substance use. Some longitudinal studies, e.g., the 1958 British birth cohort study, found that children with higher IQs were more likely to experiment with alcohol, cannabis, and other drugs in adolescence and adulthood. For instance, girls with high IQs were more than twice as likely to use cannabis and cocaine in adulthood. 2. Why might this happen? Possible explanations include openness to experience. Higher IQ individuals may be more curious and willing to explore new experiences, including drug use. Boredom or understimulation in traditional environments may lead them to seek novelty. Social or psychological factors. Being intellectually advanced doesn't protect from mental health struggles, e.g., anxiety, depression, which can increase addiction risk. 3. However, high IQ is also associated with better health outcomes overall, lower mortality rates, better coping strategies in many contexts. So while high IQ may be associated with increased experimentation, it doesn't necessarily mean a higher rate of addiction or substance abuse disorders in the clinical sense. The risk factors for addiction are multifactorial. Genetics, environment, mental health, trauma, and more play significant roles. Would you like to see a breakdown of one of the studies or learn more about the psychological mechanisms behind this? Yes, it's true. The human body has built-in opiate, or more precisely, opioid receptors, but not specifically for opium itself. Here's how it works. The body naturally produces chemicals called endorphins and enkephalins, which are endogenous opioids, meaning made within the body. These chemicals help regulate pain, pleasure, stress, and mood. To do this, the body has opioid receptors, primarily mu, delta, theta, and kappa. Receptors that these natural opioids bind to. Opium, and the drugs derived from it, like morphine and heroin, work because they mimic the shape and effect of these natural opioids. They bind to the same receptors, often with greater intensity and duration, which is why they produce strong pain relief, and also, unfortunately, a high potential for addiction and overdose. So while we don't have receptors specifically evolved for opium, we do have a natural system that opium happens to interact with in a powerful way. Would you like to know more about how this system affects mood, pain, or addiction? Yes, it's true. The human body has built-in opiate, or more precisely, opioid receptors, but not specifically for opium itself. Here's how it works. The body naturally produces chemicals called endorphins and enkephalins, which are endogenous opioids, meaning made within the body. These chemicals help regulate pain, pleasure, stress, and mood. To do this, the body has opioid receptors, primarily mu, delta, theta, and kappa, receptors that these natural opioids bind to. Opium, and the drugs derived from it, like morphine and heroin, work because they mimic the shape and effect of these natural opioids. They bind to the same receptors, often with greater intensity and duration, which is why they produce strong pain relief, and also, unfortunately, a high potential for addiction and overdose. So while we don't have receptors specifically evolved for opium, we do have a natural system that opium happens to interact with in a powerful way. Would you like to know more about how this system affects mood, pain, or addiction? The statement that the war on drugs has been declared lost is not officially true, but it's also not entirely false. It depends on who is making the claim and how you define lost. Officially, no government, especially not the US, which launched the war on drugs in the 1970s, has formally declared the war lost. Policies and enforcement continue, although approaches have shifted in many places toward harm reduction and treatment. In practice and criticism, many public health experts, economists, former world leaders, and advocacy groups do consider the war on drugs a failure for several reasons. Mass incarceration, especially of marginalized populations. No significant long-term reduction in drug supply or demand. Billions of dollars spent with limited success. Increased violence linked to drug cartels and enforcement in some regions. Public health crises, including the opioid epidemic. Key voices. The Global Commission on Drug Policy, which includes former presidents of countries like Brazil and Mexico, has explicitly said the war on drugs has failed. The United Nations and World Health Organization have also criticized punitive drug policies and called for more humane, health-centered approaches. Summary: false as an official statement. True as a widely held, critical perspective, well, especially among reform advocates and scholars. Would you like a timeline of how the war on drugs has evolved over time, or a look at alternatives being proposed or tried today? Yes, in several cases, drug decriminalization has been associated with reductions in crime, though results vary depending on how policies are implemented and the broader social context. Here are some key examples. 1. Portugal decriminalized all drugs in 2001. Results: drug-related deaths and HIV infections dropped significantly. Drug-related incarceration rates decreased. Overall crime did not increase. In fact, petty crime related to addiction fell. focus shifted to treatment over punishment, with expanded access to health and rehab services. Portugal is widely considered a success story in drug decriminalization. 2. The Netherlands. While not fully decriminalized, the Dutch have long tolerated regulated cannabis use. Violent crime and drug-related arrests are relatively low compared to countries with strict policies. Focus is on harm reduction and separating soft drugs from hard drug markets. Oregon, USA, decriminalized small amounts of all drugs in 2021. Early results are mixed. The goal was to reduce incarceration and invest in treatment. Arrests did drop, but the rollout of treatment funding and infrastructure has been slow. Some critics argue crime and public drug use have increased, while others say it's too early to judge long-term effects. Key insights. Decriminalization alone isn't a magic fix. It works best when paired with strong public health services, accessible rehab and mental health care, education and prevention programs. In such systems, addiction is treated as a health issue, not a criminal one, which can reduce crime associated with drug-seeking behaviors, like theft or prostitution. Would you like more data or a comparison chart of these countries' outcomes? Yes, it's largely true that most modern militaries use some form of drug or pharmaceutical aid to enhance soldier performance, though it's very different today from the widespread use of stimulants like amphetamines in WO2. Historical context. During World War II, Nazi Germany gave soldiers Pervitin, a methamphetamine, to increase alertness, reduce fatigue, and suppress fear and hunger. Allied forces, including the US and Britain, also used amphetamines like Benzedrine for similar purposes. Modern military use as of 2025. Today's use is more regulated, often aimed at specific performance enhancement, medical needs, or stress mitigation, such as 1. Stimulants, go pills. Modafinil and sometimes dextroamphetamine are used by air forces, e.g. in the US and France, to keep pilots alert on long missions. These are often referred to as go pills and are tightly controlled